Welcome to the Nerve Guys podcast, where we discuss movement and well-being from the brain's point of view. Hosted by Gareth Kelly and James McCambridge, this week's episode is sponsored by the Neuroband, a wearable vision and balance training tool designed to develop posture, focus, and flow. More info at the end of the episode. So, question this week, why can't I sleep in hotels? Didn't get asked this directly for the podcast, but it's come up a bunch of times this week and it's stuck in my head. So we're going to have a go at it. And a couple of different things. So, in the context of how I was answering this, it was people who were traveling through the UK. So, like within the same country, and the time zone wasn't different, and the climate wasn't massively different. If anyone's interested, we can do a video on jet lag and what to do about that. But this is more like when the reasons why you wouldn't be able to sleep are less obvious because it's the same time zone and it's, roughly the same temperature and stuff like that. And one of the people who was asking also was traveling regularly for a job. So even you could argue, I'm sure a big thing that stands out to people is it's an unfamiliar environment. So, if you're in a unfamiliar environment, it should be obvious that, you're not going to sleep as well because, from a danger perspective, your body doesn't know what's going to happen. And that's a big part of it, but we can get a little bit more specific about that because basically when you're trying to sleep, your conscious body is shutting down. So your conscious self is saying, all right, I'm gonna sit this next 8 hours out. And the unconscious self is going to take over. And in terms of safety, as a general rule, your unconscious sections of your brain tend to have a negative bias towards everything as a way to promote survival. So your autonomic nervous system, the unconscious nervous system, whatever you want to call it, likes to think and assume that everything that is happening and everything that potentially could happen is the worst possible version of whatever that is. So if it comes up with like a 50-50, this could be really good or it could be really bad. It's always safer to assume it's going to be really bad than really good. And if it always acts as if the bad thing is going to happen, your chances of survival are going to increase dramatically. And what that means is your conscious brain is supposed to do the opposite. Doesn't always. A lot of people will be familiar with your conscious brain constantly, thinking the worst, assuming the worst. But that's not the way that it's supposed to be. Your unconscious part of your brain is supposed to be the one saying, hey, what if all this bad stuff happens? I'm going to prepare for the worst. And then you consciously are supposed to do the exact opposite. You're supposed to say, I'm going to make the best out of every single situation that comes up. I'm going to be the optimist here, and I'm going to assume if it's 50-50, whether something bad happens or something good happens, I'm going to assume that something good is going to happen. That doesn't mean that you get an optimistic outlook on life because in terms of like power in the brain, let's say, the unconscious sections are way more powerful. So it's like most generous I could give would be like an 80-20 split where 80% of the power of the brain is controlled unconsciously, and then 20% is controlled consciously. And that is where, if you find that you're somebody who is constantly dooming on everything, you're generally pessimistic and you're just spending all of your time in worry, it's not because your conscious brain is not functioning correctly. It's just because the unconscious systems have decided that based on all the information that they got, that information just wasn't good enough. And so they're going to assume that everything's bad. And then that means that they are going to present your conscious brain with negativity, like negative emotions and uh, negative things in like the way you physically embody yourself. So, your unconscious nervous system might control your posture and things like that. And if your posture isn't great and you're struggling to have good posture, that's not going to feel as good as if you feel like all tall and upright and things like that. So your physical embodiment, the uh, physical processes in your body, as well as like your emotional state, are all going to bias things negatively. And then that means consciously, even if you are being an optimist, you're being an optimist in a pretty crappy situation. So, what does this all have to do with sleeping? Well, no matter how familiar you consciously get with, sleeping in a hotel room, when you are actually asleep or when you're trying to get to sleep, you're trying to tell your conscious brain to stop working, to like shut down for the evening, and let your unconscious brain take over. And that can sometimes be problematic. So let's talk about the actual sleeping part first, and then we'll talk about getting to sleep. One of the things you probably find is, unless you've got some like really great member deal with your hotel, no hotel room is going to be exactly the same. And even within the same hotel chain and stuff, things are going to generally feel different. Especially it's not going to feel like home. Your body while you're asleep is technically a lot of it still awake. So while you consciously are asleep, there are still aspects of your body that are still kind of functioning. So, you can still, certain nerve receptors will still register touch on your skin, even if you're not aware of it. You will still hear noises, even if you're not consciously aware of it. You can see examples of this. If you hear a loud bang in the night, very often what people recognize is they wake up and then they hear the bang. And it didn't happen in that order. The bang came first, but the brain said, well, there's no point in like, I need to wake you up consciously, and then I need to give you this information. So it wakes you up and then it kind of plays the sound back almost very, very quickly. And so you're like, oh, I woke up. That was a coincidence because the loud noise hadn't happened. No, the loud noise had actually happened first. And there's just this like buffer period in your brain where if it realizes it's important, it's going to make sure that you're awake and around to get the information. And that can happen with all of the different senses. So when you're sleeping in a hotel room, even when the hotel, you go in and you see it's all the same stuff and it's pretty familiar to you, your unconscious brain, who is the pessimist, is still going to say, well, this isn't the same. This isn't what I call home. This isn't the same stuff that I normally get. The temperature of the room's different. The weight of the blankets are different. The feel of the blankets are different. The echo of silence or the echo of the noises happening around me are different to what I'm normally used to. Even the level of darkness is potentially going to be different. So, and the smell of the room as well, which will also have an effect on your taste. So we can say like all the five external senses are on high alert because everything isn't the same as it usually is. And so if you want to improve your ability to stay asleep in a hotel room, you've got to find a way to override that or to kind of teach the brain that these things are okay. So if you know that you're going to be traveling a lot, one of the things that could be useful if you like to stay in hotel chains a lot, find out what kind of blankets and sheets that they use and just buy them for yourself at home. Try and buy the same types of beds and mattresses. If you're driving there, you could even bring your own bedwear so that when you're sleeping, the touch feels the same. Um, you can do similar things with your ears. If the echo of the room is different, then you can put, earplugs, ear defenders, headphones, something that you can sleep in to play noise that is familiar to you, or even, like noise canceling headphones so that you block out the external noise of the environment. And something really subtle like that, if you do it at home as well, suddenly this environment becomes a little bit more familiar and it becomes a little easier to manage. Then, when we think about actually getting to sleep, the other thing that might be useful to think about is when you go to sleep, it's one of the only parts of the day, it's one of the only times of the day when you're doing nothing. So, like a time when you're not on your phone, you're not thinking about like 10 different things that you want to do or you have to do, you're not um, eating, you're not engaged in some other task. There's not many parts of your day that happens. I can think of sleeping, showering, and for some of you, using the toilet. And for a lot of people, they're already bringing their phones in there as well. So that time where you're doing nothing is actually crucial for processing thoughts. So your brain is constantly trying to send you loads and loads of thoughts. And some of them are useful, some of them are not useful. It doesn't really control. It just says this might be important, this might be important, this might be important. And your conscious brain goes, yeah, not dealing with that, not dealing with that. I'll deal with those some other time. And whatever stimulus caused those thoughts to come up, if they keep getting ignored and never have time to be processed, they're going to keep wanting to come back. And the only time that they can really come back properly is when you're specifically doing nothing. So when you're doing nothing, when you're about to fall asleep, that's the time that all of these thoughts come back. So if you find, that's just a general rule for improving your sleep is actually spending a little bit more time that's not right in the evening where you're doing nothing, just spend a bit of time chilling out on the sofa, whatever. Turn off your phone, turn off your TV, and just sit and think for a little bit can be really useful. But it's doubly so when it comes to a hotel room because you've already got this unfamiliarity of the environment, but also you're probably thinking on overdrive as well if you're doing something that isn't like your regular day-to-day schedule. So, if you're traveling for work, you're probably going for a work meeting that is requires extra level of thought and extra level of thinking. If you are going for like a holiday and stuff, you're like your schedule is just not your normal schedule and you're having to think of 20, 30 other things that you wouldn't normally have to think about, which means all of these extra thoughts that your brain's trying to give you are being pushed down even harder because you don't even have time to think about the stuff you want to think about. And maybe even that stuff is getting shifted out to the side to, creep back in later as well. So having a bit of time to do nothing, having a bit of time to like write things down, or having a bit of time to do some kind of exercise before you go to bed could be really useful in a hotel environment as well. And if you really are struggling with sleep, may also be better if it's something that you can do in the room that you could also do in your room at home before you go to bed normally as well. So if this is a problem that you know that you're regularly having, it's probably better to build as similar as possible of a routine at home as you do in your traveling environment, so that your unconscious systems in your brain go, okay, this is different, but it's not that different. There's not that many different things that I'm having to deal with. And, you know, it might feel like you're treating yourself a bit like a baby, saying like, I need to have all the things exactly the same every time or I can't go to sleep. But that is kind of how your brain likes to work. It doesn't want to switch the conscious self off and make itself in its most vulnerable state if things aren't how it feels comfortable. And your unconscious brain really does demand that it be in charge of all of these things. So the more similar you can make everything, the better it's going to be long term. So those are just two things. Do shoot us a message if you want to discuss any of that further. But I think that about covers it for. Thank you for checking out this week's episode. As always, we'd appreciate if you'd like and follow or subscribe. If you have any questions or if you're interested in workshops or one-to-one coaching from Gareth and James, send us a message on the Nerve Guys Instagram page. Finally, we'd really appreciate it if you'd check out the Neuroband, our very own product and the sponsor of this video. You'll find a link to the Neuroband in the description of this episode.